Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is James Colborn, and today I'm going to be taking you through, on behalf of AIM Technologies and AIM Shop, an overview of the new Race Studio 3 analysis, which has moved into production. So just to make sure that everything's all right, if someone can give me a thumbs up in the message box that you can hear me okay. We'll go through a little bit of housekeeping, and then we will get into the conversation. Thank you. Thumbs up coming on screen, which is absolutely brilliant. And so what I wanted to be able to just say before we get going is if you wouldn't mind keeping yourselves on mute, and if we can just make sure that questions are addressed in the chat box. The chat box is a brilliant way of being able to discuss. We have a lot of people here today from AIM, which is lovely, crossing many different sort of continents, I should say. We've got a special guest as well, Emiliano from AIM in Italy, who is the architect of the software. So he's going to be around to answer questions and comments. I'm going to ask Emiliano to say a few words in just a minute as well, because obviously this has been a big sort of labor of love for him in terms of being able to get the software to where it is today. And then no fancy presentations or anything today, or I should say no presentations today. We're just going to move straight into the software itself and go through that. But before we do, Emiliano, do you want to say a few words about the software and what it means to you, and you know, where we go from here?
Yep. Hello, everybody. As James just told you all, I'm the author of most of the software at AIM. We just moved the Race Studio 3 analysis part of the software into the production, as we considered it stable enough for doing this step. For sure, software is not finished. It will be. To me, it's never finished. As long as people ask for requests, I try to develop them and to improve the software in all its aspects. So here I am.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for Emiliano for being here, and I'm sure that we'll have a good discussion going in the chat box that generally tends to happen. I did a webinar with AIM in the US yesterday, and the chat box was going the whole way through. May have been because I was clicking on the wrong buttons, but that's could have been part of the conversation too as we go through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and hold on a second, let me just do that. And I'm going to go to screen 2 where I am now, and you should now all see Race Studio 3 in front of you. If you can give me a yes on that one, that'd be great. Yesterday I didn't say, can you give me a yes? And I talked for ages with a blank screen, which would be great. Lovely. Thank you all so much. So don't be fooled by the little icon down here. Most of you will see this icon when you're using it. I don't know if it's my computer or if it's having a sort of a thing of its own, but this is the Race Studio 3 production. I know this is the icon for the beta, but mine seemed to have sort of flipped a little bit. But one of the things you can be sure is if you've got the latest version of the software, I wanted to run through a few things before we even get into the analysis, so you know you've got the right kind of software and installation that is there. Now, there are a few clues in relation to whether you've got the version that's got the analysis, and I don't mean this to be sort of too basic, but there's a few things. The first you'll see is you'll have this button here. This will take you to the analysis capability within Race Studio 3. The next thing you'll see is there's this little icon with a face that's here. This has been all sorts of different graphics. Right now it's a face, and this is the indication that you're in the version of Race Studio 3 where you actually have to log in. And as we go through the presentation, I'm going to show you some of the key advantages of logging in to this version of Race Studio 3. So the best way to be able to make sure you've got the software, though, is to click on the little blue cloud that is here. When you click here, you'll be taken to this particular page, and it will give you the opportunity of being able to download the software, and that is what will happen. And so you should all, if you're interested in using this version of the analysis, You should be on 3.52.03, which came out yesterday. You can see that because as I hover over it, it says yesterday, which I've never ever noticed that before, which is really nice. And so that's the first thing I would say. The next thing I would say is logging in is important. So you log in. Many of you may have used the beta version. If you haven't, I'd recommend that you get your registration and your login taken care of, because some of the stuff we're going to show as we go through today will allow you to be able to start sharing certain pieces of information, which will only sort of develop further between instances of Ray Studio 3 that you've logged into. So for example, I happen to be using my desktop right now. This is the machine I use when I've got all the time in the world and I can sit there and work with data and move things around and get the custom view as to how I want it. And I build this sort of beautiful profile, or I should say I build this profile, which allows me to achieve what I want to get out of downloading the data. But it's not my race laptop. My race laptop comes with me everywhere, and it's used when I'm at the track. And so I'd say in the olden days, with Ray Studio 2 analysis, I would have to export those profiles, for example. I would then have to upload them into the new computer. Now, if I log into any instance where I have Ray Studio 3, I can share those. And I'm going to talk you through some of those aspects today. The next thing I want to be able to point out, I'm going to click off that, is this should be switched on by default. But if you're somebody who wants to slowly transition from the old form of the analysis, the Ray Studio 2 analysis, the one that we've all been using for many years, and you want to be able to slowly transition to using Ray Studio 3 analysis. However, this Ray Studio 3 is your primary way of downloading data. You might have an Solo 2, you might have a Solo 2 DL, you might have any of the devices that use Ray Studio 3 for configuration and download. You still want to make sure that everything's working in both. And so up here, there are a couple of this button here on preferences. If you go into data download, you will have the option here of making sure that the analysis mode, make sure both of those are ticked if you want to make sure that you are working through both of those particular instances at the same time. That's particularly important if you want to be able to switch between the two, or there's something you're really comfortable with that you slowly want to be able to develop over time. So they should be ticked by default. Mine were, and I know that's something that Emiliano made sure was there, but that's a sort of key component as well. So now we're in a position where you've downloaded, you've got it set up, or loaded, I should say, on your machine. So the next thing we want to do is actually go into it. Now, I did do a webinar with the AIM sort of technologies, probably one of the first or second ones we did in around April last year. So a lot has changed since then. So I'm going to run you through some of the basics that we covered. But what we're also going to do over the next few webinars that we do is we're going to cover different aspects of the Ray Studio 3 analysis software, looking at different types of applications. So one of the things that I will ask is that if there's something you want us to focus on by the time we get to the end of this presentation, and it's sort of given you sort of oh, I'd love to learn more about that, just drop a note in the chat box and we can potentially address that in future webinars. But hopefully we'll cover off on quite a few of the sort of the major aspects today. So without further ado, I'm going to click on this button here. Now this is Ray Studio 3 analysis and uploads a view of the data. Now what I've done is I've actually loaded some data in here. I've loaded some data which I recorded over the weekend, and I've recorded some data which I logged last year. One of the things you're going to face as you look at this for the first time is you're going to be presented with a blank page. And so you're going to need to either start downloading the data from your devices using this, and they will appear here. But if you want to be able to go back to any of your other files that you have, especially if you're using Ray Studio 2 analysis, there's many ways of doing that. But you'll be presented with something that looks like this. This will be the screen that you see, and it'll give you the opportunity of being able to import a folder or import files into your setup. Now, I'm not going to tell you what to do here. I think this is going to be specific to what files you want to be able to use and how you want to do them. But I'm going to give you a few sort of pointers that may be of use to you. And so I'm actually going to import a file that I created just to show you how the process works. But there are other options of importing a folder. And one of the things you may want to think about is if you want to mirror your RayStudio 2 analysis data in RayStudio 3, and you may be wondering, well, why do I want to do that? Well, the reality is if you're using one of the older software, and I actually had a conversation with someone just this morning who said to me, hey, can I use Evo 4 data in the new RayStudio 3 analysis? The answer is yes. If you've got an AIM Solo, yes, you can use that data in any of the older devices. Now, it might have a few aspects in terms of some of the rendering of the lines might not be as smooth because it's using older technology, but at the same time, you can analyze the data. And so you just import a folder of wherever you house that. So you can see this is my hard drive that I have. If I click on the C drive where AIM Sport always is, you'll see RayStudio 2 here, and then you'll see data. And so if there were files on here, you could load your data in here if you so chose to do so, and then you could just select the folder and bring them in. To save time in today's demonstration, though, I'm not going to do that because, as you can probably imagine, I've got quite a few files, being somebody who often people send data to be able to analyze, and that might take a while on import. So I'm just going to demonstrate how that works. I'm going to click on import. I'm going to say import files, and I've got a few here which I've sampled, and I'm actually going to import one here, which in a dream state, I would have driven an Audi R8 GT3 at Alton Park, but in a virtual state I haven't. So I'm going to click on open there, and it's going to import that file. And that's how it works. It comes in just like that. This is an iRacing file, for example, that I have here. And you can see that information that is housed here. So there's the iRacing file. And you actually get a nice little iRacing icon that shows up. So that's just to demonstrate how to be able to potentially bring the data into the system overall. Now, one of the things that you may be noticing is that you thought, well, in previous examples, I may have watched videos, I've seen lots of information that's been available, and all you're showing me is 3 particular sessions that are here from testing this last weekend. Where's all the other information that might be of use? And so before we even get into analyzing the data, we may want to be able to customize this particular page for something that works for you so you can analyze your sessions a little bit better. So up here, there's some buttons, and they're particularly useful in terms of giving you different views of the data. My favorite one to use, and the one that I'm going to recommend you have a look at to start off with, is at this one. It says to choose a preview window for that you'd like to see the data with. So right now I have this one. It just looks like a blank square, but basically it's saying blank square, which is right here. That's basically, if you think about what I'm looking at and what you're looking at on screen, that's what we're looking at. But if I click here, I can add some information, and I like it to show at the bottom. So if I click on that, you notice that now all of a sudden I've got some additional information which is available for that particular session that ran. Now, this is useful because if you want to be able to flick through sessions quickly to find the one that you're particularly looking for, this might give you the opportunity of being able to work it. And you can see that this icon, for example, has changed to sort of a place below. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is that when I loaded RayStudio 3 analysis for the first time, this is what I saw. And I think that if you quickly flick through this, you miss some of the advantages of this particular page, which I personally love. And there's a few features that I really like, but I can show you that you can also see the data on the right-hand side if you're somebody who likes to read from left to right. So you go test, session, data from the session, or you can do it this way, which is you've got the test, the sessions, and then the information. So lots of ways of being able to customize your view, and that's what we're going to look at a little bit today, is some of the basics as to how to use this software. But it's got some really nice features. Now, one of the ones I'm going to show you is one of my favorites, which is not only do you load the session, it loads information about the laps that have been driven, but there's other information. And you may notice down here, there's some information which is useful to be able to help. And I'm not going to click on all of them, because what I would encourage everyone to do, we've actually talked about this on the webinar yesterday as well, is the best way to learn this software is through curiosity. If you see certain things that can be clicked on, click on them. You're not really going to make too much of an issue. I personally, when I started using the software, if I started clicking on things with configurations, I really was careful of what I clicked on. But we're looking at analysis and looking at the data sessions here, and there's not much you can either overwrite or change that can't be changed back. And so I would encourage a lot of clicking and a lot of finding out in terms of what's going on, especially if you want to do it with a data file. that you can, you can easily just upload and use again. So down here, there's some certain buttons, and just to give you an idea, as you hover over, you can see your laps in terms of consistency on that particular page. You can see it based upon the lap, your out lap, in lap, and so all of these sort of different pieces of information, some averages there. You can add data here, but you can also add this button, which I love as well, which is you can actually click and find out information about the day and the consistency. Now, there's no data against this particular file, but typically we found that there is data against all of these, and I know this is potentially something which may be associated with my file, but what I'm looking at is I'm trying to sort of demonstrate that there's a lot of information you can click on very quickly just to be able to have a quick view of what's happening in those particular laps. This one's nice because you can say, if I want a quick view of the file, I can add here, add, and I'm going to show you something here which I'm quite embarrassed to show, but at the same time, it does a good job of being able to demonstrate why it's nice to flick through. I know that during the session I had yesterday, oh, now I can't believe it's Wednesday, Sunday, one of the sessions I ran, I had an overrev, and I want to be able to analyze that quickly, and I don't want to go into each of them and find it. I've added maximum RPM here. I know it's this one now, and you can see there it is, right there. So I know that this is the file that I want to go in and do some analysis on engine health and those sort of things. So it just gives you a nice way of really being able to navigate the data files nice and quickly in terms of what's going on. A few other things which are important to note on this page as well, I think, are just understanding these icons that are here. If the icon looks like this is a data only file. It's a file which is downloaded from somebody who doesn't have a SmartyCam, and therefore it's a data only file. If I click here in this Brands Hatch one, you can see that I have this little icon here that looks like a movie. Well, that's a SmartyCam file. So if you're lucky enough to have a SmartyCam running, you can also see that one and see that data. And later on, I'm actually going to link these two together so you can see a third icon with this particular data. But these are important to be able to know what file you're looking at, because if you want to quickly find the SmartyCam file, you'll notice that in the new Race Studio 3 analysis, the video icon has been taken away from up here. Instead, now you'll be able to find your files by just looking in the session date, and you'll look for this particular icon in the setup, or you'll look for it combined. The last one I want to be able to show that I've used, there could be others, but I think there are 4, but there could be others, is if you happen to be a sim racer, and you can see that if you see a file that comes up with the iRacing logo, I'm sure there's a logo for Assetto Corsa and R-Factor as well, but nice to know that there are other variables if you wanted to be able to look at, oh, that's a sim racing file versus an offline file or a traditional file that's there. So this is just navigating through some of the key sort of aspects of the test database, which I think is so much easier to navigate and gives you so much useful information as you're looking through. But what we're going to do now is we're actually going to go in and start looking at analyzing the data. And so yesterday when I ran the, I sort of co-presented yesterday with the folks in the US, we talked about purpose and why you download your data. And I'm not necessarily going to get into too much of that in a sort of a conversation today, because we could talk about that for hours. But it's important when you download the data to be able to get an idea of what you want to be able to have a look at. Am I looking at this to be able to improve as a driver, or am I downloading this data just like that example I just gave a minute ago when I looked at this data and I was looking for an overrev? Or am I going to download the data to be able to see if there's something I want to assess in relation to the vehicle health or the engine health, or I want to be able to download it and have a look at chassis development or those sort of things. But what I want to do today is I want to navigate through some of the setup by focusing on a couple of those sort of key aspects, which I think will be useful as you think about how you can use Race Studio 3 analysis, to be able to operate your everyday, your purpose, why you download data. It's one of those sort of moments of reflection, which is, why do I download my data? For me personally, I do it so I can be a better driver, and I do it to make sure my car's running well. And these are the key things as to why I download data. So I want to set up views that allow me to do that. So I'm actually going to start today with an AIM Solo 2 file. Nothing fancy, nothing to sort of, oh, look at all those RPMs that you've got and all that extra data. I've only got an AIM Solo 2, so does this work for me? And we're going to slowly progress through the presentation today, having a look at different aspects of Race Studio 3 analysis. So this one here, I know is a Solo 2 file because I put it there. I'm going to load this one up. This is from last November at an event called the Walter Hayes Trophy, driving my vehicle. Now, when I download the data from the AIM Solo 2, it, just like everything, gave me the opportunity of being able to label up the file in the session. But if you want to change that, you do have the option here. And so you can click on this gear icon. Now, remember one of the things I said earlier, if you see a gear icon, click on it, because it'll give you another set of menus and another set of things to be able to work on. So if you ever see this in a data file, you can click on it and you can do all sorts of things here. I'm not going to do any of these sort of things that are here, but I'm going to click on properties, because this is one of those scenarios where you can update the properties of a session to give you a little bit more information. In this one, I can see that it was a race. It was from an AIM Solo 2 because I put those notes in there. It was from a Formula Ford, which is number 76. That'll make sense when you see there's a number 75 as well. You know, I can update this data. I can add in sort of information. So if ever there's a moment when you don't like what you're seeing here and you want to update it, there are options. And so just keep an eye out for a gear icon, because that'll make life a little bit easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load this one up. And one of the things you'll see straight out of the gate is that you're not going to see really some of the stuff which makes any sense to you. Now, I've never loaded an AIM Solo 2 file on this version of Race Studio 3 analysis yet. And interestingly, this one defaulted to internal battery. Whereas when I loaded yesterday a file from an Evo 4S, it defaulted to RPMs. I think there's just a standard default that it goes to until such time as people want to be able to customize it for their own view. Now, there's a few things that you should know as we start looking at working through the software. And some of them are familiar, with Race Studio 2 analysis, the previous version, and some things are newer and more exciting. I've left up on here one of the things that I set up in yesterday's demonstration, which may make many of you think, oh, that's quite nice, which was I actually left on the corner names. Of anyone who's driven Silverstone National knows that Copse, Club, Maggots, Wellington, Brooklands, Luffield and Woodcote represents corners and straights. And so that's where I've got this set up. And I'll show you how I've done that a bit later on, but it just goes to show some of the things that are slightly different with this version versus the previous. Eagle-eyed viewers will also spot that there is a nice little map down here. And for many of us, the use of Google Earth using Race Studio 2 analysis data was always a very attractive thing because we could see the line, but it was a bit of a faff in terms of downloading the file, uploading Google Earth, uploading the file to Google Earth and working through it. And it's for many of you who know, I have a YouTube tutorial channel for many of the AIM devices and software. Still to this day, for the last 2 or 3 years, downloading your data and overlaying it on Google Earth is the top 1 or top 2 videos that people watch on a monthly basis. And so we know it's a huge feature. And so interestingly, Emiliano is going to put my YouTube channel out of business because he's integrated that nicely into the software. And so it's right here now as default as you look at it on the page, so as I scroll in and out. Now we'll create a bigger view of that in just a minute, but you can start seeing that I've got a view here, which is similar to the measures graph that I would have seen in the last version. I've now got this nice little mapping software that is here. And then I have all my channels, and then I have the option of going to laps. And so these are the 3 sort of key areas of focus that we want to work on when we're setting up a view. Now, I mentioned earlier that my purpose for downloading data is to improve as a driver. And any of you who may have seen webinars that I've done before is that there are certain default views that I've become accustomed to that I use to be able to determine how I'm doing as a driver. And so I use certain channels to be able to do that. If I'm using GPS data and I'm not getting more advanced with math channels, and if the word math channels makes you shudder a little bit going, well, that's a bit complicated. The beauty of Race Studio 3 is many of them are built in, and that will be a later webinar in the next, probably maybe do it the next one or the one after, where we can add some of the default math channels to be able to make life easier in terms of getting even more advanced with GPS-based data. But for the purposes of today's demonstration and to keep the flow, I'm going to use some basic ones that help me understand if I'm doing a good job as a driver. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I don't want internal battery. So I have an option here. If you notice, it's the only channel that's off to the left and it's bold. That means that it's selected. If I click on it, it goes back over to the right. It goes not bold. I don't even know what not bold's called. Normal, I suppose. And you see the page is blank. And so we need to start again and start adding in certain aspects that what we want to be able to add. So for me personally, I like GPS speed, and everyone should love a speed trace. It's one of the best things to use. And I'm going to be super simple with this explanation to start off with. I'm going to use longitude and acceleration. Now, people often wonder, why do I use longitude and acceleration? Well, down means slowing up, and up means going far and speeding up. And so you can see the transition points and you can understand what's happening. The harder and sharper and the more aggressive this is, the harder the brakes are. And so I've always used this as a really good proxy to be able to get an idea in terms of what the driver is doing, most of the time the driver being me, so I can get an idea in terms of what's happening. So now I've got this view set up, and all of a sudden now I can start seeing, speed. I can see what the driver input's doing. So you can see this correlates here. And I can see as I'm slowing down and decelerating, the speed slows down, and then, speeds back up again, coming back up, the transition from slowing to speeding up and then down the straightaway. So that's a great way of being able to see the data that is here. And so you may be wondering, well, that's great, but I want to be able to do some lap comparison. I want to be able to see what was happening. So you've got two choices at this particular point. The first thing you may want to be able to do is to go into laps and say, well, this is a 1046. Let's have a look at another 1046 and see how we did. And if I click there, you'll start seeing that two lines have started to show up. And now we can start analyzing. But one of the things that's missing on here right now, and it will actually be default and will show up when you use yours, but I turned it off earlier. Not sure why, but I turned it off earlier, is that you want the time compare bar. So the reason that it's not on is I've deliberately turned it off. And this is a great sort of indication of all of the sort of functionality that you can use in the new Race Studio 3 analysis software, is that the possibilities for customization are so much greater than they were in the old software. And so if you ever want to be able to then start playing around with it, if you don't see a gear icon, which we're going to talk about later, look for a, I can actually say it here because I'm doing it in the UK. In the US, they don't have this word, but look for a spanner or a wrench, but look for a spanner sort of icon as well. Because if you click on that, you have the option of getting some more information that's here. So I'm on something called time distance. So if I click on time distance, I can click on this thing that says time compare bar. And if I click on OK, now I've gone to the point where we now start seeing, the sort of performance. And so now we can start seeing how each of the laps was doing against the other laps. So we can see, for example, coming through COPS, we can see here that the sort of brown line is slower, and as it's slowed and it's overslowed in that corner, you can see the speed delta different. There's a delta here, and by the time we get to maggots, you can see that it's almost like a 1/10 of a second that is different. Now you may say, well, those are quite steep lines for a 1/10 of a second, but I run Formula Ford, so a 1/10 of a second is huge. Well, I think it is in all racing. That's a bit sort of like, oh, it's Formula Ford, that's fancy. No, I think all racing is any spec series. A 1/10 of a second can be the difference between, second and ninth on grid. But the other thing as well is I've selected two laps that are almost identical. The other thing you may be wondering was, well, brown's a bit difficult to be able to see. How about we change that to a different color? Just click on it. And I'm not going to go through every one of these features, because some of them are similar to Race Studio 2 analysis, and other ones I just click and work it through. So just click through different aspects and figure out what works for you and how that sort of looks. And so now all of a sudden I've got a view which is quite familiar for me. It's something which I've used in Race Studio 2 analysis, and it's something I'd like to use in Race Studio 3 analysis. Now, one of the things I mentioned earlier was that the mapping software is available too. So, one of the things I can do is, if I wanted to, I can zoom this in. and I can start having a look at the difference between the lines and saying, okay, well, COPS, coming out of COPS, was there a difference that was here in terms of what's happening? Well, notice that the blue line takes a lovely wide line and uses all the road, whereas the red lap sort of pinches that off a little bit. And so now you can see this. And remember, I'm not using data that's come in from sort of an extremely fancy system. This is coming in from your entry-level AIM Solo 2, which I had bolted into the car to be able to sort of, use it in examples such as this. And so I think this is a lovely way of being able to look at the data. But from this point onwards, I don't want to lose this. And so the next thing I need to do, and we drew the analogy yesterday that anyone who used to write, a document and a word processor or a spreadsheet and, didn't save their work and then everything sort of stopped. That's something that we have to get used to in terms of working with user profiles in RayStudio 3 analysis. And so to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move over here to the left. I haven't even talked about these bars yet because we've only focused on time distance. But before we go anywhere else and before we do anything else to this, I want to save it so that we can move on. And so I'm going to click on this little gear icon here. Remember, gear icons, and sort of spanners and wrenches. All of those will give you all sorts of options to be able to work with. But I'm going to click on this one right now, and I'm going to click Save Profile As, just like Save Document As. It's the same sort of mindset that we need to take. And I'm going to say, this is driver analysis GPS. And so there you go. So now this has changed up here. It says driver analysis GPS. And I've got this view, which is available. Now, one of the other things which I think is interesting as we look at this conversation too, is that any analysis that you prepare with GPS is the lowest common denominator that exists across every single AIM device that is made that logs data, which means that you be able to use this profile if you are analyzing data from an AIM Solo 2 with somebody who might have an Evo 4S, to somebody who might have an MXL, to someone who has an MXL Pista, and so forth and so forth. And so it gives you the option of being able to create a view that works for everyone. And so this is the initial sort of view. I've saved this for me. Now, one of the things you may be wondering at this point is that, well, talk to me a little bit about these across the top. Previously, in RayStudio 2 analysis, you would have had to have gone and build a new map, which would have created the opportunity for you to be able to, what's the best word to use? Build a map, set the segments, and the system would have done right-hand turns in blue, straights in green. So this is another right-hand and left-hand turns in red. But what we've got in this instance is we've got an opportunity to be able to do way more than that, and we can add in certain variables. So by default, and I will show you this in a minute by loading up another file, where it will just automatically create a view of those particular files. In fact, I can show you that now by loading up this one. So this is Brands Hatch. I've done nothing to these files in RayStudio 2 analysis, RayStudio 3 analysis. And notice when I load that up, one of the things that you'll notice at this point is that, let's turn that one off. You'll notice that these are numbered. So this is default, happens for every track that AIM has in the database. It will now automatically overlay for you, straight, right hand, straight, left hand, straight, lefty, righty, as we know where that is. That's coming up through, I think it's 30s here at Brands. And so it does that for you, which is a nice sort of feature and function. And so we're going to talk through how to edit those a little bit later in terms of customizing your experience. But that's what happened. That's automatic. You don't have to worry about building track maps. However, maybe in later webinars, we're going to look at how to be able to create multiple versions and share those. But for the purposes today, we're just going to look at some of the basics. So I'm going to go back to that session I was working on. Here it is again. And we were doing some lap analysis. I was going to use, well, I was using this one. And that's where we were before we left. Now, what I've done is well, hold on. This one says COPS. This one says club. It doesn't say 1, 2, 3. What I've done is I've right-clicked in it and I've renamed it. And so what you can do is you can now adjust these as you so choose to be able to make the view that you want to be able to know how you've done in each of these corners. Now, you may be wondering, well, why are you going to do that? What advantage does that bring to you in terms of analysis going forward? Well, there's many different ways of being able to sort of work through this. but I'm going to talk about a few of them today, but there are so many of them to be able to sort of talk about this. One of the things you may be wondering is, do you know what? I'd like a closer look at what was happening in Cops Corner. And that's good. Just double click here. And I can double click on that and it will zoom in to what's happened through that corner. And so that's the first thing you can see. Plus, this will show you how fast you went through that particular section on each and every single one of the laps. So you can start having a look at certain types of performance that are there. So that's a nice sort of way of being able to have a look at that. If you want to get out of it, you can just go up here, click on zoom to reset, and you go back to where you were. So that's the first thing, that this gives you the opportunity of being able to zoom in and find out what you need in terms of the segmentation. Now, if you're wondering, can I adjust these? Of course you can. If you want maggots to be a little bit bigger of analysis, notice how I'm hovering over it and this mouse turns into a finger. If that's the case, you're like, oh, curiosity says, what's that going to do? You can either right click in it, you get a lot of information, or you can just drag and drop and make the segment a bit bigger or larger, depending on what you want to be able to see. So there's a lot of sort of advantage that come from that particular scenario. Now, the reason I set this up as well is that I want to be able to use this for other features. If anyone remembers Race Studio 2 analysis, which we use every day, there's a feature which I believe is the second of 3 major screens that you need to have to be able to look at drive development using Race Studio 3 analysis, and that is the split times report. Now, right now, you notice we've got time distance here. This was default. I haven't added any more buttons and I haven't played with anything here. But what you can do is you can hover over these and you can start seeing new analysis that's going to be available to you to be able to look. And if you just hover over them, it's going to tell you what they are. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on this one that says show the split times report. And so that analysis and that segmentation that here you created, now available here in terms of segments, so you can start looking at consistency across the lap, and you can start looking at additional information. But my favorite thing that you have on here as well, which is the real sort of like boost to our performance, is what was our theoretical best lap if we did every one of these corners perfectly. And so you can go down here, you can see what the best theoretical lap would be. But there's so much more available now in the split times report than used to be. I'm actually going to drag this one over so we've got a bit of extra view on here. And so what you can now see is that you have additional information. You have the map, so you can see the line. And if you hover over, you can see what the line was at anywhere on the map for that segment. It's a nice feature. You have this view, which tells you how you did in relation to different aspects on track. And these are available to you to turn them on and off. And so for me personally, my custom view is I actually love just the GPS speed view. So I turn these off by clicking here. And this now gives me something which I firmly believe is one of the best features of being able to demonstrate consistency and performance that you will get from the Race Studio 3 analysis, which is, if you think about your lines and you want to be consistent, if you did the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, and you did it identically, there would be one line here. If you're inconsistent through all of these lines would start to distance themselves. Roger Cadell from the US training group, AIM, taught me that's noise, and they call that noise, which I think is a great way of describing it. And so as you click over each of these segments, you can get an idea of what the noise was in each of those areas. So you can see down the straight, isn't that good? Down the straightaway, I'm quite consistent, and that's where the maximum amount of skill is needed, as you can probably tell as a race driver. But at the same time, if I get into a corner like Luffield, So as you can probably tell in this instance, there could be some cleanup that's required there. And this, don't forget, I'm only using an AIM Solo 2 at the moment. I'm not adding any fancy video or any other features that are here. I'm just using an AIM Solo 2 to be able to talk through this. So this just gives you a lot of information that is here. And you can see each of those lines that are showing up. I don't know why I'm pointing at the screen, because you can't see my finger because you're watching the screen, but I'm pointing at this map at the bottom, which I can probably make a bit bigger. And you can see all of those different lines that are there. So it's a great way of being able to convert these segments that are here into an analysis that shows up here. And it's a lovely way of being able to view the data that you have, all automated and done within the software, which is fab. Now, there's a few other things on here which are nice. I personally like something called conditional formatting. Sounds like I'm life of the party, but it's something that I particularly enjoy. And so I can start clicking on some of these buttons and it will give me some additional information that I can see. This is the one that you click on, and it will colorize these into ways that you can see consistency and inconsistency based upon the best performing and the worst performing. And then you've got all your standard deviation stuff down here as well. So you can see that there are some areas like going down the straightaway, that's pretty consistent. And you can see that, you know, that's not bad at all as we look at it there. If you're wondering about, well, why is there nothing there and everything, they're sort of in-laps and out-laps. So you can actually just turn them off. And it makes life a little bit easier in terms of analyzing, rather than in previous versions of the software, you would have had to have right-clicked, disable the lap. You can just go in and tick it on and off, which I think is nice. Plus, the way it's been designed is it already turns on and off the in and the out lap, so it doesn't skew the data, so you actually get a true representation of what the lap would be. But if I go to other areas and I have a look at somewhere like Luffield, for example, we talked about that already being a little bit, which is official definition, you can see here that the color combination there's no consistency there. So I'm already starting to look at this data from an AIM Solo 2 that was in my car, and I've got a ton of great stuff that I can actually go into. Now, one of the things that I want to keep instilling in the conversation is that, okay, so I've built a view and I want to keep it. Click here, save the profile. Now, don't save it as, keep it as the profile, but just click save. And it's just like, if you were saving a document, you could save it and keep updating. This means when you open it up again, you're going to have the same view available to you and you don't need to worry about changing it. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you on this, and then I'm going to switch to a different view where we're going to add in more channels and we're going to add in some video, and we're going to look at the more advanced functionality of Ray Studio 3 analysis as well. And then we will slowly go through each of these areas in more detail in later webinars. I just wanted to sort of give you a bit of a starter depending on your device. Is the last screen that I genuinely recommend people use on this page is this button. So as you scroll across the top here, again, don't always have to click on it, just have to hover on it and it tells you what it's going to be. So click on this one, it'll open up another tab and you have the opportunity of being able to see the data in a lot more detail. So we were looking at Luffield and we were looking at information here that might be sort of inconsistent, and we can look at the lines and see what was happening. And, you know, at this point, after a lot of, you know, self sort of reflection, I would probably sit down with somebody who knows what they're doing and be able to ask them what the line needs to look like. I'm not sure if I was actually driving on the grass at this point or it's an overlay of the GPS. And this is something that potentially happens in terms of the mapping software, and the lines aren't always going to be lined up. But there is another thing, which I think is a nice way. You don't always have to use Google Earth. So if you notice there's these little sort of layers that are here. If I click on that, I can choose to use a different mapping software to be able to see if they do a better job of being able to overlay the line. And so right now, they're all sort of a much for a muchness in terms of where that is, but at least they're all consistent and you can see a different view. So you can see all sorts of different providers of the data to be able to see if it's accurate. Now you may be wondering, is this an AIM thing or is this a software thing? This is a mapping thing. It's not a software thing, because the number of satellites that the AIM device is picking up could be more accurate. And so it still gives you an idea in terms of the accuracy, looking at what's happening. And more importantly than not, just got a ton of inconsistency here. So I can scroll out, I can look at the map, I can see all the segments that are here, I can see where I've got the mapping laid out. I'm just doing this, zooming in and out using the mouse. And again, if you're wondering, well, how did he do that? Curiosity will be your friend in all these instances. And so I'm just rolling the mouse, the rolly ball on the mouse, and it's zooming in and out. It's just simple like that. Then on the right hand side, you've got this feature that allows you to be able to see what you did there. You can also add extra stuff to this. So if I click on here, this is a button that allows me to add additional channels to this assessment here. I may be able to go in here and I might want to be able to see, should we have a look at, let's see what happens when we put speed in, for example, which I can't find. There it is. and I want to be able to see the minimum and maximum through that particular area. So I can see what was the consistency like through that particular area. I'm going to zoom back in, just drag and drop, that's all I'm doing. And I can see what my minimums and maximum speeds were coming through here. This is an interesting one. 55 versus 50. So you can see that the line was dictating potential speed and speed in, speed out. I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but it allows you to be able to play around. And this is what I'd encourage you all to do, work through this. And this is just working with a file that's recorded the bare minimum, which is GPS. So those are the three things that I'd recommend. And if you get those set up, I'm going to click Save Profile. And interestingly, if anyone's on this and is interested in using this profile, that's another thing which is nice, is that because it's GPS data, I can download this and send it to you. And the only thing you'd arguably need to change would be the names of your segments, depending on the track you're using. And so if you're interested in this profile afterwards, let me know, and I will happily send it out to you on email afterwards. So that's to start off with. So that's looking at Race Studio 3 analysis in the most applicable way for every particular device. But one of the things that I wanted to sort of finish off today is let's look at the power of Race Studio 3 analysis with those of us who are fortunate enough to have a lot more data, and what can we do with it in terms of making it a little bit more sort of elaborate in terms of a setup. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this one off, and I'm going to go back to my database of data that I have. Now, if you remember earlier, I mentioned that I had a data file and a video file. Now, ideally, we want to be able to look at the data and the video at the same time. Now, if you're like me and you use some configurations of the hardware, there are very few configurations that this happens, but if you happen to be using a memory module, for example, this will happen. If you're not sure what a memory module is, if you're somebody like me who uses an Evo 4S, there's a long USB cable, which is a real nuisance to have to get in and out constantly on your device. So I had added a memory module, so I can just put an SD card in and out to grab the data. It helps at the end of the day when you're trying to get your car put away and everything, and you're like, let me go on my laptop, kind of get a bit of power and everything. So that's why I've got one, but it means that it doesn't automatically sync your data and video. And I know it's something that's being worked on in terms of linking. However, if you use other devices, you might, for example, have a SmartyCam and an Evo 4S, and you downloaded the data through USB, this might happen automatically. But if it doesn't, if I highlight this session here, which I know is the same session as this one, because the lap times are almost identical, the timing is almost identical, same track, same everything, it was the same session. If I right click on those after highlighting them together, I can click this button that says link the items. It says, are you sure? I am sure. And one of the things that you'll notice now is if I go back here, there's that fourth icon I was talking about earlier, which is this is data and video together. And so now you'll see both of them overlaid against each other. So when I open this, it's actually going to open at the last one that I saved, which was the driver analysis. But a few things have changed in terms of looking at this. The first is that I now have a new little icon here, which is the data and movies. And I have the option of being able to customize a brand new layout, depending on what's happening. But I don't really want to change too much to start off with, because I like a lot of this view that I have here. I want to keep this. I don't want to change this too much. I just want to add a few different bits and pieces. And so in this instance, instead of having GPS longitudinal acceleration, which I'm going to turn off by clicking here, I'm going to add in brake pressure. I'm going to add in throttle position. And I am going to organize these in a view that I like. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to custom sort my channels. And you may be running, well, you're going really quick, and we're going to video this so you can follow along. But these are the things that everyone should be sort of playing around with working. But what I'm doing now is I'm customizing the view so that I can see how my data will show up. As I want to be able to analyze the driver performance. So if I change that, now I've got the view very similar to how I had before, but I've got the driver inputs aren't GPS longitudinal. Now the actual driver inputs in terms of what my feet have been doing, what my sort of hands have been doing, which I'll show you in a minute with the video. But again, if I want to save this, I'm going to save the profile as, and I'm going to say this is a new profile, and this is driver analysis sensors. And so now I've taken the profile I had before and I'm adapting it and updating it for the view that I want to be able to have going forward. What I'm doing here is I'm double clicking on the scale, similar to Ray Studio 2, to make it easier to be able to see. And then if I go in here and I select a lap, pick that one, same thing applies. I've seen my time distance, but instead of seeing what's happening in terms of time here, and why is the blue line faster than the red line, I've now got some indicators and clues as to what the driver is doing here. So you can see that these transition because I was trying to carry the speed through the corner rather than here slowing the car down, getting it turned, and then being on throttle sooner and carrying out of the corner. And you can see that quite quickly from the data. But you know, all of this is available for customization as you look at it. But this isn't really what I wanted to show you. What I wanted to show you was this button. So if I click here, one of the things that has changed now is you notice I've got a brand new page. I've got a brand new sort of setup that I have. And I've got the option of being able to configure this for the view that I want. Now I've got new stuff on here, which I don't use. And this is the beauty of Ray Studio 3. People say, well, hold on a second. Why is it there if you don't use it? Well, I know one of the people on the call today uses this all the time. It's their go-to for being able to select laps. And that's the beauty of the customization of the software. It works for however you want to set it up. So this is this down here. It's called the storyboard. I don't use it. And so some of the stuff I want to be able to show a little bit as well as we go through is that you can customize a view. So if I right click down here and I click on remove window, that goes away. If I wanted to add it back in, I right click on a window, add the window, I can go to the bottom, I can choose, and I can say bring the storyboard back, and there it is again. And so I can move the way that things show up on the page to be able to customize the view that I want to be able to see. Now, one of the things that you've noticed, I'm sure, is that on this page, we now have video that is next to the data. And so what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to customize this view so it is the same here as it is here, but I also have the data and movies. So I'm going to do the same thing again that I just did. I'm going to have brake pressure. I'm going to have throttle. And one of the things you'll notice is as I was selecting these, they appear in this box. They're overlaid with each other right now. Don't worry. This is the overlay view. We're going to fix that in just a minute. So we wanted brake pressure, RPMs, throttle, and speed. Speed would be useful so we can see what's going on there. So let's have a look. I like using GPS speed as well. So those are all the views that I have of the data. And you may be thinking at this point, yeah, I can't see much on that. And that's because just like in Ray Studio 2 analysis, we've got to get used to setting up the view as to how we want it. And this is where we go up here to different views. And so I've got lots of options. I can either have them on top of each other, which is what we have now. Now you may be wondering, why do you have it on top of each other? Why would anyone ever use that? Well, if you wanted to be able to look at certain traces, like I had this earlier on today for a health channel where I had that over rev. And so I had two overlaid on the top of each other. I had RPMs and throttle. So I could see, coloring them different things, where the throttle, was it an over rev in terms of a missed shift, or was it actually, was the clutch engaged, was the engine engaged, or was it a free rev? Just little bits of analysis are there. It's nice to have that overlaid on top of each other, but for this analysis, it doesn't work. And so I'm going to click on this button here, and it just tells them to how we want them to be. One of the things you may be wondering is, well, what if I wanted two on one page, a two on one line? You can just go to the mix tile and you can say, I would like to have GPS as the first one on the top. I want to have throttle and brake on the same one. And then I want to have RPMs as the third one. So 2, 3. And so now I can see that I've got that instance of throttle and brake on the same one if I wanted to have it, or I can have them mixed. And so this is a way of being able to customize that view. But one of the things that we did want to have a look at is the power of the data and the video together. So now one of the things that you may have mentioned, we may have looked at earlier, is I've got a 52.4 and a 52.6. They're pretty close, which may be difficult to see. So let's do this. Let's see if we've got a lap here, which is awful. I don't know what this one is. So let's have a look at that one in terms of if there's anything major on that one that we can look at. I'm going to recolor this one red to make life easier and see where are some of the major differences. Well, there's one here. And straight away, I didn't know this was going to happen, but let's do this. I'm going to put the mouse there, and I'm going to notice that there's a big delta here in terms of the speed as we go through that corner. But watch what happens here when I play that, and I can double click in it to make life easier in terms of studying. So as we come down, notice that there's a car on the right-hand side here. Can't get the car out to where I want it to be. And so as a result, that's compromised the corner, compromises my ability to get the throttle, compromises my speed, and compromises the time. But the fact that I can just zoom in and out there without video, I'd have no idea about that. I wouldn't have remembered. How many of you can remember how many times you've passed someone or got past, depending on the car you're in, when you're on the data? And so this gives you the opportunity of being able to really break down that analysis and understand what has happened in that particular corner. And it helps you remove those areas of sort of challenge. Now, you could have seen that data down here in the line. And sure enough, you can see that the line is compromised one versus the other going into Surtees, I think it's Surtees? No, Graham Hill Bend. I actually deliberately put a map up of Brands Hatch over here just in case, because I still can't remember all the corner names. But in many respects, you can see that it compromises the corner coming through, but it just allows you to do this sort of analysis. And I'm going to zoom back out, and you can see that there are other key sort of aspects coming through here. Notice as well, and this is where Smarty Cams are fantastic on their own, but they add together. You can also overlay and see what's happening with the throttle. The throttle matches here. So you can see that if I go to this particular point here, coming out of this corner, again, it must have been a Formula 3 lap, that's one, in terms of what was going on. But you'll notice that, look at the throttle position here on the data trace, matches the throttle position that is here. The red lap is engaged, whereas the blue lap is not engaged from that point of view. In fact, I actually went to the throttle sooner with the lap traffic. But it's just to demonstrate that all I'm doing now is I'm clicking and playing through the data, overlaying the data with the video at the same time to be able to understand what's going on. And so I'm not going to go to any more of the finer details because we're coming up onto the hour. But what I wanted to demonstrate to everyone today was that the Race Studio 3 analysis has so many different ways of using data, but that I also wanted to be able to demonstrate that it doesn't matter what device you use, the functionality that's available to use in the new software gives you so many different options to be able to customize your data, and it just improves the more of the AIM setup that you add to your car. And so for me personally, I absolutely love, I've been using this now for a little while in terms of being able to understand what's happening. And if we're using this as the purpose of understanding driver improvement, then understanding what the driver's doing, both graphically with video and an overlay, gives every single possibility in terms of how you want to learn and how you learn that data. And so I'm going to stop talking at this point. Hopefully we'll have some questions coming up we can talk through. And I'll also put my information in the chat box so you can ask for the profile and I'll happily send it through to you. But what I'm actually going to do finally on this one, because I quite like this view, is I'm going to click on Save Profile so I don't forget that before I stop sharing. So that's today's presentation so far. Really sort of wanted to open it up and see if anyone's got any questions, which I would say, just for the purposes of the number of people we have on the call, if you want to write the question in the question box, we'll give it an attempt to be able to answer it. And the beauty of it is that we have the person who built the software here, so they'll probably answer it as well. So any questions, feel free to fire away right now. Ooh. Who's going to be first? It always starts, there's always like a 30-second, and then all of a sudden the questions start coming in. Email the profile, absolutely. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Let me do that right now. I'm going to email the profile to everyone like this. But remember, I've only sort of scratched the surface of Race Studio 3 analysis. And so one of the things that we're going to start working through is a series of looking at those in more detail. For example, that data analysis with video. There are so many nice features of clipping the data and sort of analyzing it in more detail and sort of really working through that. We're going to look at that in more detail. We're going to look at customizing, sharing track maps and how to move stuff around. And one of the things that I promised to do and I didn't do, so let me go back in just to finish that off, is I was going to show you what the advantage of logging in was. And let me show you that right now. So I'm just going to send this to everyone here. Hold on a second. So that's my email address. Send me an email and I will send you that profile that I created today. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. I'm going to share the one with the Brands Hatch track map on it. Sorry about that. Hold on a second. I'll click on share. And we should be back in Race Studio 3 analysis now. Now, one of the things that I said earlier on is because you're logging in, it gives you an advantage in terms of sharing across machines. And this is what I love. I've created this profile, but if I use my race laptop to download the data and then I store it in the cloud, which I generally tend to do, I can then look at it on my desktop. But going back again, I want that profile to be used elsewhere. So what I can do is I can go back to the database, the all database. And again, this little gear icon, if I click here, if you notice there's these profiles, if I scroll over to the right-hand side, and we'll share both of these with my other machines today, driver analysis GPS, if I click on that button, share, doesn't feel like anything's just happened. But what you've actually just done is the next time you log into your instance of Race Studio 3 and your login profile on another machine, you go in here and you can click on import profiles and you can import the profiles that you've just sent from one machine to the other. So the advantage of being able to log in, and I have no doubt that that's just the first of many of the shared features that would exist. And so I promised to show you that. So I want to make sure I put that in before we finished. So there, any other questions? Please feel free to ask. I can go for a few more minutes. I'm sure we can, but we're at the hour. So just let us know. Export, import profiles between different people. That is an area, we'll look at that next time. In fact, one of the things that there will be webinars, the US webinars will cover some of these things as well. So I thoroughly encourage everyone to look at both of them. Is you can also export the profiles just like you would have done with Race Studio to analysis and upload them. So when you receive this profile, if you're interested in getting it from me on email, I'll put a little sort of screen grab as to where you can go and just import that directly in as well, which is there. Some folks are wondering about the track. Track approach, it will automatically default, and then the next webinar I'm going to show you how to set up multiple different variations of the track with the splits that exist. If you don't have those automatic splits that have been created with the file that you've uploaded, there may be an issue with uploading all of the, maybe you haven't got the GPK file, I think it's called, which may have the GPS data, so the system doesn't know what track you're at. We'll probably cover off on those on another time, but one of the things that is available on many of our videos that are online, mine and many of the others, is how to export and import data, so you make sure you export all of the data which will make it function. So I will address many of those import export functionalities in the next one, and feel free to send a note to me, or probably more importantly, if it's something that is preventing your software from working, might be useful to send it to the AIM support. And I know James Mully is on somewhere today. James, can you just put their email address in the box for everyone if they've got a challenge which they can't easily answer, that the support can as well? That'd be useful for everyone to know where to go if they've got some stuff that's coming on, because I may have some questions that will be useful to answer there. Thanks, James, I appreciate that. Is there an option to save the channels report as a PDF? I don't know the answer to that question. Emiliano, people are right on top of it. They're asking the questions and answers. So the answer to that was no export to PDF at the moment. Look at more previous webinars. Thanks for now, which is great. Thanks. I appreciate people saying nice things, which is good. Looks like we've covered most of just the screen here. Is a lot of empty space above the grass where Trevor's name is. Great to have more space used more efficiently. Yeah, great. Sorry, I'm just reading the questions out there. It's funny, if you've written anything in here, I would have written, it's like if you'd asked me to read out what my PIN number is to my mobile phone, I probably would have done it too. Great. I think we're done with time right now, which is good. But again, you've got my email address, you've got the email address of the folks at AIM, you do get the emails and stuff. So if there's anything you'd like us to cover, let us know. And with that, I'll say thanks so much for attending today, and we'll see you next time.